Elena here. Welcome to Reality Nexus X, the only corner of the internet where the spiritual principle gets treated with the respect it has earned. None whatsoever. Tonight's feature is a man who has spent a lifetime confusing attention with authority. Kody Brown, patron saint of performative fatherhood and selective devotion. If the early years were the audition, the later seasons were the full production. Staged contrition, outsourced accountability, and a rotating schedule that somehow always rotates back to his own convenience. Stay tuned, because this is not a family saga. It is a case study in what happens when ego gets a belief system, a camera crew, and 4 households worth of people expected to applaud. For anyone still searching for an origin story that explains the later spectacle, the most consistent thread is not theology, romance, or even family values. It is performance. And Kody has been rehearsing for decades. The early character sketches are unflattering in precisely the way that makes them useful. Showboat, compulsively angled toward the spotlight. The kind of teenager who treats a hallway like a stage and everyone else like supporting cast. There are the familiar supporting details: obsession with hair, careful presentation, the insistence on being perceived as likable by peers and teachers, paired with the less heroic academic profile. Not a great student, self-described as not very smart, but a big deal in wrestling. A place where attention is earned through spectacle as much as discipline. The rumors that followed him in those years, classmates speculating about his sexuality, the recurring claim that people thought he was gay, are repeated often enough to function less as evidence about orientation and more as evidence about persona. Flamboyance, self-conscious grooming, and performative charm read by adolescent observers as theatricality. And theatricality gets translated into gossip. Whether the rumors were fair, cruel, or simply the lazy shorthand of adolescence does not actually matter to the analysis. Because the point is not who he desired. The point is that he cultivated being seen. That appetite for visibility does not fade with adulthood. It merely acquires better lighting and a larger audience. The supposed next chapter does not resolve the contradictions. It institutionalizes them. The storyline includes an LDS mission after high school, a 2-year demonstration of discipline and devotion, and then a homecoming in which the family's religious framework shifts and a second wife enters the household. That is not merely a plot twist. It is the moment the stage expands. A young man who wanted to be noticed is handed a system in which attention is not only abundant, but sanctified. A structure that treats male centrality as virtue and female accommodation as the price of admission. Questions about college and early work life are answered in the same slippery register as everything else. Claims that contradict later claims, references to college days that later dissolve into assertions that college never happened, and a general haze where the facts are less important than the narrative utility of sounding like a person with a life arc, rather than a man who stumbled into a role that suited his temperament. From there, the public narrative attempts to sell something noble. Multiple romantic marriages functioning like standard Western partnerships, multiplied. But the subtext keeps sabotaging the brochure. The family's grandest fiction is that these marriages are traditional love matches operating inside a larger, cooperative household. Yet even sympathetic observers point out the obvious. Plural marriage does not primarily optimize for romance or compatibility. It optimizes for hierarchy, scarcity, and status. If romance happens, it is a bonus, not the design. In that design, wives are not simply spouses. They are positions. When one wife describes marriage preferences in terms of rank and placement rather than mutual fit, That is not a character flaw so much as a confession that the system rewards strategy over intimacy. A husband who falls in love inside this system does not merely have a personal awakening. He detonates the hierarchy. Kody's relationship with Robin is described as the moment he realized what he had been missing. The second chance fantasy. A new wife, a renewed self-image, a restart button disguised as destiny. That would be merely ordinary midlife irresponsibility if the structure were monogamy. Within polygamy, it becomes an authoritarian reallocation of resources, attention, and legitimacy. The Meri baby storyline crystallizes this control dynamic, and it does so with the kind of cruelty that still manages to present itself as concern. Kody repeatedly presses Meri about having another child, couches it as her decision, and performs the eager partner role, even raising IVF, only to reverse himself when she finally signals willingness to pursue medical steps. It is an elegant little trap. Prompt a vulnerable hope, watch a spouse agonize, then withdraw at the moment she becomes ready. Because readiness on her part would remove his leverage. The interpretation offered is blunt. It keeps her on the hook, a slow stringing along that can be framed as compassion while functioning as control. The show's camera only intensifies the manipulation because the audience is used as a prop. A miracle baby storyline is dangled, production incentives hover, and the couple appears to play cat and mouse with the idea of trying while not actually doing the basic, unglamorous work of a relationship that would produce such a child. Emotional closeness, physical intimacy, consistency, and truthful conversation. The fertility arc becomes even more revealing in the clinical scene where the most basic question, frequency of intercourse, produces evasiveness. A fertility specialist asks how often sex happens. Meri responds awkwardly, insisting timing is not the issue. Viewers infer the opposite. The charitable explanation is camera discomfort. The less charitable and more persuasive explanation is that the entire conversation is performance, because the marriage is already at a stalemate and intimacy is already absent. In that reading, the discomfort is not prudishness, it is exposure. A simple medical question forces an admission that would collapse the storyline. IVF talk is meaningless if the baseline relationship is functionally non-sexual. That reading aligns with the broader claim that Kody used baby talk as proof of effort without the inconvenience of effort, presenting himself as hopeful, committed, and wronged by fate, while avoiding the reality that he had already redirected desire and energy elsewhere. Then comes the Christine revelation, and it lands like a demolition charge placed under the romance narrative. The claim attributed to Kody, never being attracted to Christine, does not merely sting. It reframes the marriage as a strategic acquisition. The criticism is direct. Marrying her for her family connections, keeping her around through obligation rather than desire, and depriving her of the chance to find someone who would actually love her. Even people willing to critique Christine's expectations concede the core moral failure. Choosing to marry a woman while privately holding contempt or disinterest is a decision, and the consequences belong to the chooser. In this framing, Christine's later liberation is not merely a breakup. It is an emancipation from a role that was never designed to be fully human. The emotional violence of being told, explicitly or implicitly, that one's body repulses the person who claims spiritual authority over one's life is not small. And it is not a relationship issue in the casual sense. It is the weaponization of intimacy as a status tool. Robin is framed as both catalyst and collaborator in this deterioration. The storyline insists there is no shame in falling in love, as if anyone were scandalized by affection rather than appalled by abandonment. The grievance is not romance, it is dereliction. Kody is compared to the middle-aged cliché who discovers a new love and promptly discards the old family. A familiar tragedy dressed up as destiny. The expectation is basic. If the marriage structure requires equal time and care, then equal time and care should occur, or the marriages should end honestly. Instead, the critique alleges, he dropped obligations, treated earlier wives as burdensome remnants, and neglected relationships with children while protecting the new household's comfort. Robin is criticized for accepting this arrangement and for benefiting from it. A man who discards his former family is not a prize, and treating that discard as proof of devotion is not romantic. It is short-sighted. There is also the anticipation, almost a grim punchline, that such behavior eventually turns on the last favored wife. The prediction varies. Either he repeats the pattern and seeks another, younger version, or she becomes the one to exit, possibly returning to religious structures that would validate her. Either way, the underlying argument is consistent. A relationship built on being the favored exception is inherently unstable because it depends on someone else staying beneath you. Robin's alleged insecurity is explained as structural. She entered a dynamic that looked like emotional infidelity to outsiders. She knows how quickly soulmate language can be deployed to crown a new favorite, and she has every incentive to prevent anyone else from sharing the throne. That incentive is why commentary suspects she still believes in the principle in a selective way, keeping the identity while resisting the practice, because a new wife would not merely add a person, it would reduce her power. This flexibility is attributed to Kody's broader approach to religion. Pick the parts that flatter, discard the parts that constrain, and invent new rules when convenient. The portrayal is of a man who picks and chooses, who can acknowledge some children's identities when it helps him look modern, but refuses acceptance of a trans child, suggesting that principle is less moral compass than prop. The religion becomes an accessory closet. Wear compassion for the audience, remove it when it pinches. Meanwhile, the wives are described as having spent years propping him up, selling polygamy, and smoothing his ego, because in this system, ego management is not optional. It is survival. Favoritism becomes the economy. Bolster him, become favored. Challenge him, become punished. Comply, receive crumbs. Dissent, get a lecture about loyalty. If the earlier seasons sold a fantasy of earnest domestic complexity, later seasons are accused of selling something even thinner: staged redemption. A scene is described with Kody and Robin outside in the snow, carefully positioned. Robin pleading for him to reconcile with his children and even claiming she is losing respect for him. The skepticism is almost forensic. The shoveled patch that resembles blocking. The idea that the narrative was prearranged to soften Robin's image, and the suspicion that the conversation is less marital conflict than public relations triage. The claim is not that Kody suddenly becomes an actor. The claim is that he always has been, and the show finally stops pretending that reality is the point. That laundering becomes more pointed when discussing redemption arc seasons. One season is characterized as designed to redeem Robin, but then a tragedy in the family disrupts the desired narrative when her reaction reads as indifferent, and the storyline becomes unsalvageable. Another season is framed as designed to redeem Kody, but amends with children remain absent, leaving the redemption premise hollow. If all that remains is staged conversation, stilted interaction, and an atmosphere where even the youngest children appear coached into being careful little spokespeople, then the show ceases to be a window and becomes a press release. The complaint is not merely that the scenes are fake, it is that the fakery reveals the priorities. Authentic reconciliation would be messy, unflattering, and uncontrollable. A managed conversation, by contrast, is safe. Nowhere is narrative management more obvious than in the so-called apology tour. There is a near mathematical mockery of Kody's language. Apologize, repeated at a rate that suggests he believes sincerity can be manufactured by frequency, with sorry rare and sometimes attached to small, petty points. The apology is described as a monologue rather than a conversation, a performance of contrition that never quite specifies what is being apologized for. The face and mouth are portrayed as disagreeing, words that claim humility paired with expressions that signal irritation at not being praised for showing up. The logic is adolescent. Repeat the correct word, and the other person is obligated to accept it. The critique is sharp because it identifies the real goal. Not repair, but absolution. Not accountability, but immunity. Not, what did I do? But, you cannot hate someone who is apologizing. Meri's response is praised precisely because it refuses to validate the script. Rather than allowing him to say sorry into the void, she insists on being included as an equal participant, effectively rejecting the structure in which he speaks and others are expected to react with gratitude. In a system built on his centrality, that insistence is revolutionary. It is also a reminder that the wives' supposed failures, staying too long, tolerating too much, did not come from a lack of intelligence so much as from prolonged normalization. When cruelty is routine, it stops sounding like cruelty. When a father ignores children regularly, it stops registering as a scandal and starts being described as a personality quirk. That normalization is one of the show's most corrosive achievements. It trains the viewer to accept the unacceptable by delivering it in weekly installments. The consequence of that dulling is felt most acutely with the children, where the commentary shifts from snark into indictment. A warning delivered to Kody: repair relationships with adult children now, or they will not be present later. Sparks debate not about the core truth, but about the framing. Some interpret it as transactional, as if children exist primarily as future caretakers. Others argue it is simply the only language a narcissistic parent might understand. Still others insist the moral imperative is simpler. Repair should happen because he is their father, because he helped write their internal sense of worth, and because abandonment is not a parenting style. The harshest conclusion is also the bleakest: that he lacks the capacity to truly love those children in a functional way, and that inviting them back only when convenient would risk further harm. This is where the analysis becomes clearest about Kody's psychology. He is described as lacking self-awareness, walking into rooms and immediately interpreting people as an audience, misreading obvious social cues because he assumes attention is his default right. The earlier showboat label returns with adult consequences. A teenager who demands center stage becomes a father who believes children should orbit him, and when they do not, he interprets their distance as disrespect rather than as consequence. In this reading, he cannot read the room because he imagines he is the room, and anything outside his script is, by definition, wrong. That is why he can mistake avoidance for politeness, resentment for confusion, and silence for agreement. It is also why public appearances that he believes showcase charm can instead showcase something else. a mismatch between self-perception and how he lands with adults who are not contractually obligated to indulge him. The response to outsiders who state the obvious becomes another revealing subplot. A new partner in the family orbit, David, is defended as normal, reasonable, and even the voice of common sense, while others treat his plain-spoken advice as an attack. The explanation offered is cutting. After years of dishonesty and performative storytelling, simple honesty feels aggressive. There is also the darker accusation that narcissists from a distance protect each other, discrediting an outsider so the central figure looks less culpable by comparison. Even the nitpicking about minor incidents, manufacturing outrage from mundane interactions, reads as an extension of the show's larger distortion. If everything is drama, then nothing is accountable. Not everyone in the extended circle reproduces Kody's template, and the contrast is used as evidence. Caleb and Mitch are praised for evident attentiveness to their children and spouses, for modeling a steadiness that makes Kody's self-absorption look even more theatrical. Mitch's craft, creating a Viking ship urn, reads as an act of care, rather than an act of display. Tony is defended as an irritant with purpose, someone who breaks the fourth wall, pokes at favoritism, and trolls the patriarch during wedding planning precisely because he recognizes the family's tendency to treat some children as higher status than others. His loudness is framed not as narcissism, but as a matching of his partner's energy, with one crucial difference from Kody. He appears to spend time with his children, rather than treating them as props. The compliment is faint but meaningful. Obnoxious is survivable. Neglect is not. That warning becomes explicit in the critique of age and power dynamics. Caleb is questioned not because he seems unkind on camera, but because he reportedly began dating Maddie when she was a teenager, an arrangement that should not be celebrated simply because it later becomes normalized. The point is not to litigate every detail of timelines. It is to refuse the family's habit of turning questionable dynamics into romantic inevitabilities. In a broader system that already concentrates power in older men, casual celebration of such pairings reads less like love and more like conditioning. The questions that hover around his early adulthood, where he lived, what he did for work before cameras arrived, how a man with modest academics became the face of a televised principal, are answered less by resumes than by temperament. The most plausible through line is that the role mattered more than the route. A conventional path would require competence, patience, and a willingness to be one adult among many. A plural marriage patriarch on television requires only confidence, narrative control, and enough self-belief to confuse charisma with character. Even the family's living arrangements, separate homes, a man rotating between them, become part of the critique. It is difficult to sell equal partnership when the structure makes one person permanently central, a visiting dignitary rather than a daily parent. The commentary also insists that this outcome was not accidental. It was engineered through mismanagement that looks suspiciously like preference. Kody is accused of refusing a real schedule from the beginning, a basic governance tool in any multi-household arrangement. Without a schedule, every visit becomes a discretionary gift rather than a predictable duty, and every wife becomes a competitor for time rather than a partner in logistics. Layer onto that a career path that keeps him away from home, and the system conveniently preserves his freedom while demanding constant labor from the wives. Child rearing, household management, emotional regulation, and the public performance of harmony. The critique, at bottom, is that the sacrifice was never equally shared. The husband wanted the power, the applause, and the romance narrative without the grinding consistency that might have made the arrangement less cruel. And when the arrangement finally collapsed, he treated collapse as betrayal rather than as inevitability. Robin's role in this economy is characterized as both beneficiary and gatekeeper. There is an accusation that she does not truly want reconciliation with the older children because reconciliation would dilute her influence and revive relationships that do not revolve around her household. That is why staged scenes read as strategy. Show her urging outreach, show her losing respect, and hope the camera records a conscience. Yet the same analysis concedes that Kody can be chaotic and enjoys blindsiding women as a power move, keeping everyone slightly off balance so no one feels safe enough to demand fairness. In that view, even collaboration is unstable because it is still ruled by his need for dominance. The social dynamics in group settings reinforce this reading. Kody is criticized for repeatedly failing to read a room, misinterpreting someone's obvious dislike as concern about optics, or assuming that physical distance is a respectful gesture rather than a simple desire not to stand next to him. The sharper diagnosis is that he once believed he was the room, and now the room has the audacity to exist without him. A later appearance on a competitive show is invoked as accidental satire. He appears convinced he is charming while others read him as slow, a mismatch between self-perception and how he lands with adults who are not contractually obligated to indulge him. That mismatch is the same one visible in family conversations. He believes repeating a word creates reality, believes occupying space creates authority, believes being loud creates leadership, and remains unable to grasp that being loud is not the same as being loved. The final layer is the critique of the principle itself, because the math never adds up and the evasions are the point. If polygamy is divinely mandated, what happens to the surplus men? The recurring answer encountered is the theological equivalent of shrugging. God will provide. The analysis rejects that hand-waving and supplies the grim sociological mechanism. Communities solve the arithmetic by pushing young men out, sometimes for minor infractions, so that a smaller pool of men remains, and leadership can concentrate wives among the chosen few. The accusation is blunt. The system functions like a pipeline for coerced pairings, with young women pressured into marriages with approved men, and critics see in the broader historical tradition a pattern of misogyny and abuse. To explain the doctrine's internal logic, one account is summarized: a premortal war in heaven narrative in which a portion of souls rebel, are cast out, and are taught to be male, leaving a surplus of righteous female souls who must be married to reach the highest heaven. Even within the telling, the point is not coherence. It is justification. A story is invented to make arithmetic feel holy. Once that story exists, soulmate language becomes loaded, implying predestination and hierarchy. One wife is the intended match. Others are appendages, tolerated for the husband's spiritual advancement or for their own salvation. Releases and sealings then become more than paperwork. They become metaphysical custody battles over eternity. Put all of this together, and the portrait becomes coherent, if unpleasant. The teenage showboat becomes the adult patriarch who cannot tolerate not being the center of the narrative. The faith becomes a costume rack. The family becomes a set. The marriages become a hierarchy maintained through scarcity and favoritism. Babies become storylines. Apologies become scripts. Redemption becomes editing. The sharpest irony is that the series once attempted to sell plural marriage as an aspirational alternative to mainstream dysfunction, only to produce a case study in mainstream dysfunction with added theological varnish. A man intoxicated by attention, a system designed to excuse him, partners trained to manage his ego, and children left to absorb the consequences when the camera stops rolling.